noted with bitterness that it was all one complete failure. Once again, tipsy friends called him to continue the fun, where one of their acquaintances promised to give them a free boat ride. Refusing this offer, Steve was left on the street completely alone. The fingertips of his hand in his pocket suddenly felt a folded sheet of paper, which he had almost forgotten about. The young man slowly took a paper out of his pocket, which turned out to be a report card, on which a moth flying nearby immediately landed. Seeing a flying insect slowly climbing up the leaf towards his hand, Steve struck the leaf with some disgust, and when the moth ended up on the asphalt, the young man trampled it without any regret, thinking about what disgusting feelings he could experience if this creature touched his hand. Looking at the report card, Steve's mother noted, not without joy, how well her child was studying. Then the woman did not yet know that in fact her son very often lies to her about his academic performance. Turning her attention from the report card to Steve, Martha asked if her son was hungry. And so, after a short period of time, mother and son sat at their poor table, on which their daily food consisted of rice and fish. Claiming that Steve needed strength, Martha put more fish on his plate, telling him to eat more. But the young man, having gathered his thoughts and strength, suddenly put down his chopsticks and said that he had a need to buy a textbook, for which he needed $100. And of course the caring mother, who was only happy with her son's success, replied that she had some money saved. A few seconds later, the woman took out the treasured bill, which she handed to her son, saying that she had no more money. At that time, Steve did not yet understand what this mother's readiness to give her last for her child was. Of course, he was not a completely insensitive person, where he was tormented by a feeling of guilt towards his mother for having to deceive her. Young people standing nearby were discussing the fact that one actor, an interview with whom was shown on TV, owned a luxurious mansion right on the ocean. Steve came closer and saw the happy face of a man who was talking about how he was poor at the very beginning of his career. The young man was very jealous of this actor, which, however, did not mean that he himself aspired to become one. He was simply always attracted to life, which was in the very center of human attention. At his first auditions, Steve was told that acting skills can be acquired, but acting talent must be innate. The young man himself thought that the Faculty of Theater Arts was also his chance to receive a higher education, since they were accepted there without having good grades at school. At these first auditions, Steve was given a short script in which he had to demonstrate his acting, where his character was a serial killer who does not think about who or how he kills and does not hesitate to commit his atrocities. At the same time, Steve himself would never even think about the life of this maniac, about the reasons that led him to this path. Although the script was short, the moment he read it, the young man suddenly felt how he merged with his character. And now Steve already participated in the first filming, where he did not play any role, but was only included in the crowd. But even for such an insignificant role, he was not often approved, saying that he did not fit into the general mass. Steve suddenly realized that there were a lot of people with the same primitive abilities as his, who dreamed of becoming an actor, all over the world, where he was unable to compete with his useless abilities. But not used to giving up and finding a way out of any situation, Steve did everything to achieve success. Standing at the sink, the young man noted that he was very hungry, but immediately drove away thoughts about food, remembering the need to save a little money for the next filming. The young man was distracted from his thoughts by a phone call, where the caller ID showed that it was his mother calling. Not ready to conduct a dialogue with his mother, tormented by hunger, Steve put the phone in his pocket, when suddenly a man's voice attracted his attention, where a man with glasses approached him and offered Steve a minor role in a small TV series. It was a good chance to show off and break into the world of cinema, and the young man agreed without hesitation. In every role of every film or series, regardless of their scale and significance, Steve gave his best. Combining work and filming, the young man devoted all his free time to studying scripts and rehearsing his role, but he continued to remain an unknown actor. Sometimes, noticing that the young man's nose was already bleeding from overwork and lack of sleep, his colleagues tried to send the young man on vacation, which he of course refused. Carrying out his work duties at one job or another, Steve's thoughts were inside the script, forcing himself to remember one line after another. And so, after some time, he stood on stage and, receiving the award for Best Supporting Role, thanked the director and project manager for his achievements. Success overwhelmed the young man, where, standing in his apartment, Steve listened to the voice of his mother, who intended to come to him. Martha also said that it was inconvenient for her to constantly receive money from her son, to which Steve, who was embarrassed by his mother, who smelled of fish, replied that there was no need to worry. Having finished the conversation, the young man continued to stand at the window and admire the view of the city, something he could never have dreamed of before. Soon he received another award for his acting talents, and was quite pleased with the way his life was shaping up. Steve had just managed to go backstage when he suddenly felt the vibration of his cell phone in his pocket. Answering the call, the young man was more occupied with one of his fans, who somehow made her way backstage, when his attention was suddenly attracted by the words that he had received a call from the hospital. Abandoning all his affairs, Steve immediately rushed to the hospital, where he found his mother in one of the rooms. Since their last meeting, the woman's face had changed beyond recognition. But even now, in the face of death, Martha cared for her son, noting his tired appearance. With slow steps, Steve approached the bed and took the hand of his mother, who loved him so much. And only now he realized that his whole life was aimed not at erasing memories of poverty, but at erasing his mother, of whom he was embarrassed. The disease turned out to be incurable, and very soon Martha went to the best of worlds, leaving her son filled with regrets. Every day this feeling of regret consumed the man more and more, where in the end he decided that he had only one road straight to hell. Having long ago stopped thinking about his future, the man, emaciated from constant drinking, stood on a stool opposite the noose that he had built for himself. And the last thoughts of this man were about why this moth flies here, just like he, who no longer has any goals in life. Looking up from her plate, Martha cheerfully told Steve to eat more, as he would need strength. Looking down, the young man saw in front of him rice and fish that were painfully familiar to him, of which he had eaten quite a few in his life. Deciding that it was impossible not to show respect to the mother who had dedicated her entire life to him, and now appeared before him as a vision of the past, Steve picked up the bowl of rice. But when the contents of the spoon were in his mouth, the young man replied that this rice had a very rich taste for a hallucination. The woman noticed how strangely her son was acting, looking around as if he didn't understand where he was, and asked if he was okay. Only then did Steve suddenly realize that his real mother was in front of him, which made tears sparkle in the corners of his eyes. Having reached the desired stop, Steve got off the bus, carefully peering at his notebook. He was distracted from this simple activity by a boy's call, which forced the young man to turn around. It was one of his classmates who invited him to play football, to which Steve refused without hesitation. And when asked about the reasons for the refusal, the young man replied that he needed to study, where he mentally added that this time he would take a different path. And while they were heading to school together, the young man only thought that he would devote this life to taking care of his mother, since he devoted his entire past life to himself. Steve, to whom fate itself gave a second chance, walked and thought that now the turning point had come, and he had the power to change everything. Rising from his seat, the teacher said that it was not today that a new capable student appeared in their class, who demonstrated excellent results on the test. Busy with his studies, Steve did not immediately hear that the teacher called his name, adding that he also took 12th place in academic performance among the students in the entire school. The neighbor at the desk had to push the young man so that he finally stood up and approached the teacher, who had already called him to him for a few seconds. Receiving the report card from the teacher, Steve noted that the teacher did not experience any particularly joyful feelings, where the man, as soon as the young man took the report card, told him to come to him in the teacher's room at the end of lessons. Not quite understanding what the matter might be, Steve nevertheless replied that he understood the teacher's demand. The teacher himself noted to himself that for a student who took 12th place in school performance, Steve had a very sad face. And here the man was right, because looking at the report card, the young man lamented the fact that he was only 12. After all, he tried very hard, did not sleep at night, and his abilities from his past life were preserved. Classes at school were over, where Steve had not yet managed to collect his school supplies, when the teacher reminded him of what was waiting for him in the staff room. Noting that he was already very tired, the young man nevertheless gave the man a sign that he had heard him and would come over now. Saying goodbye to his classmates, the young man could only think that now that the exams were over, he could go help his mother at the market. When Steve found himself in the teacher's office, he, without any prelude, began to claim that the young man had cheated on the exams. But with an absolutely innocent expression on his face, the young man replied that he had never resorted to such methods of passing exams. But the man did not believe in this, declaring that someone who studied very poorly all the time could not suddenly become an excellent student overnight. But Steve still calmly replied that this was not such an impossible situation. And as proof, the young man noted that there were those sitting around him who were not very good at studies, which meant there was simply no one to copy from. After which Steve once again said that he solved all the problems in the exam on his own without any help and without cheating. And if the teacher still doesn't believe him, then he is ready to take any of the exams again right now. Such a statement was extremely unexpected for the man and could not but cause surprise in him. Finding no arguments in response, the teacher said that Steve could be free, for which the young man immediately addressed the man with words of gratitude. Left alone in the office, the teacher noted that this guy had changed a lot lately. After leaving the teacher's room, Steve went out into the schoolyard, where a soccer ball immediately rolled up to his foot. Noticing their friend, the young people frolicking on the football field began to invite Steve to play with them. However, after kicking the ball, the young man replied that today his classmates would play without his participation. Leaving the school grounds, the young man heard his former friends discussing how strange he had been acting lately. The young man raised his head and looked at the seagulls flying above him, which created a unique landscape against the background of a bright orange sky. He remembered the very moment when he realized that he was not only alive, but also returned to the past, where his mother was alive. Touching her face, the young man tried to understand whether it was all a dream, and Martha could only be surprised at the behavior of her son. Until the last moment, Steve thought that all this was his last illusion. His last at that moment while his body hanging in a noose was cooling down. But now the situation has changed, and he stood in his past life, while still a child at school, where, seeing the birds above him, the sky, feeling the force of the wind with his body, Steve realized that all this was real. Turning his head towards the sun hiding behind the horizon, the young man noted with hope that life had given him a second chance, and in this life, he would never allow his mother to end up in such a state and die so quickly, depriving him of the meaning of her life. The attention of Martha, who as usual stood at her counter with fish and other seafood, was attracted by a familiar voice, where, turning her head and seeing her son, the woman asked in surprise what he was doing here. To which the young man, putting on an apron, replied that the exams were over, so he came to the aid of his mother, after which Steve couldn't help but notice how surprised the woman was to hear his words. Standing opposite his mother, the young man recalled that in his past life, he almost never came to the market, as he was ashamed of both the fish trade and his mother, who was engaged in such trade. But now he was determined and wanted to change everything, and therefore cheerfully said that today he would help his mother. And now, in front of his astonished mother, Steve began to examine the goods on the counter, noting that he looked very good. After which the young man decided to optimize the layout a little, while his mother, meanwhile, tried to reassure him that she was handling everything well herself. To which Steve said that his help would definitely not be superfluous, where it was not difficult for him at all, and he had free time. The words spoken by the young man immediately transported his mind to his past life, where he had absolutely no time, not only because he was always busy with acting and studying scripts, but also because he had to work a lot to have something to live on. Where, of all the professions he encountered, he was best at selling something. Now the young man understood that without resourcefulness in a market that is overflowing with similar products, it is quite difficult to succeed. And so he, throwing a basin on the ground, which became a small podium for him, began loudly calling on customers to pay attention to their fresh and tasty fish. Market visitors, completely unaccustomed to this style of trading, instantly drew attention to the boy's sonorous voice. Steve was not deprived of attention by other merchants who sold their goods in the neighborhood. But most of all, Martha was shocked by her son's behavior, who, frightened by such strange activity, began to ask him to get off the basin and stop screaming. Meanwhile, sellers and buyers immediately noted the strong and firm voice of the child, where one of the traders immediately suggested that this kid was the future celebrity of their market. Steve himself stood and was glad that he managed to attract the attention of everyone who was nearby. After which, without even thinking about stopping, the young man shouted that he would give the first 5 buyers 1 fish as a gift. The man accompanying the girl asked if she really intended to find what they needed here in the market, to which screenwriter Diana replied that when it comes to selecting characters, you need to show perseverance and perseverance. The man said with doubt that he was greatly risking the entire project by trusting to some chance, where the girl, turning to the director of the future film James, noted that his concern was clearly visible on his face, adding that this was noticeable even before they made this foray to find new characters. Continuing his journey, the director noted that he liked the child's role itself, but he doubted the actor who was approved to play it, where in response to the girl's questions, James answered that the boy had a very strange accent, and his clothes somehow didn't fit him very well. The man was about to continue his arguments, when suddenly a ringing voice reached his ears, calling on market visitors to bring them to the counter with fish and seafood. Turning his head, James suddenly saw a boy standing on a basin, who loudly shouted that when he saw the size of today's pink salmon, he decided that it was a shark. The director literally froze in place while watching the boy playfully sell fish to another buyer. Saying that he remembered to give him a bonus fish, Steve accepted the money and thanked the man for the purchase, not forgetting to say that they were happy to see him again. And so, having handed over the money to his mother, the young man, without hesitating for a second, was already inviting new customers to the counter with his ringing voice. A whole crowd quickly gathered around the counter, which found the boy's behavior very funny. Noticing how people were starting to take out their cameras, Steve, without hesitation, cheerfully announced that if someone wants to take a photo, they first need to buy a fish. After watching the boy's actions for some time, James finally said that he had found what he needed. Steve ran to his mother's outlet, clasping some container with one hand and attracting the woman's attention with a cheerful cry. And while Martha was trying to scold him for not going home to rest, the young man showed the woman a whole bowl of berries that the fruit merchant had just given him. Saying that he would continue to help, the young man began to take the box from his mother, giving her in return a bowl of berries, which he asked to put on top of the box. After which Steve told his mother that he simply could not go home, because their situation was not the easiest now, but together it was always easier. The woman stood and looked at her son in confusion, whose behavior and words could not help but touch the mother's heart. Steve, who was about to carry the box, suddenly stopped, catching the strange expression on his mother's face in his peripheral vision, and asked what happened. To which the woman, smiling, quickly replied that everything was fine and suggested that we get ready to go home together. The young man, who was unable to understand the woman's feelings, continued to think about what had just happened to his mother. At that very moment, the director approached their conversation, said greetings and asked about the opportunity to talk. To which Marta, apologizing, replied that they had sold all the fish today and she had nothing to offer to customers. However, the man suddenly said that he was not interested in shopping, where he wanted to talk about something completely different. This attracted the attention of both the young man and the woman, where, when asked by the director, Marta explained that she was the mother of this boy. Very worried, the woman asked what the man had to do with them, where Steve noted his mother's concern. Remembering his past unlucky life, the young man assumed that now his mother was thinking that Steve had managed to do something. The director also noticed the interlocutor's concern and assured the woman that nothing bad had happened. And after the man introduced himself, saying his name and saying that he was a director, Steve was completely amazed. Martha, who is not very familiar with the world of cinema, asked James what programs he films, to which the man laughingly replied that he films TV series. After which the director introduced the mother and son and his companion, who had been standing next to him all this time. And so when Steve heard the names of the people who came up, he instantly had an epiphany. After all, it was screenwriter Diana Crow in his past life who created scripts for films that, one after another, became box office leaders. And eventually she became the most successful and influential screenwriter in the entire country, where every director tried to get the opportunity to work with her. The young man then turned his attention and memories to the man, where Steve noted that now standing in front of him is none other than the future director of the entire company. The young man noted that in a previous life he could not even dream of meeting them, and he did not understand at all what they were doing here at the market now. And so the director began to clarify the situation, saying that during the day he managed to notice what a strong voice the boy had, for which the latter immediately thanked the man. And then James added that today he came here with an offer for the boy to try himself as an actor. Of course, for Martha, such an offer made to her son was not an ordinary event at all, where, in response to the questions posed by the woman, the director explained that he sees in her son many talents and abilities that he can effectively use in cinema. The very subject of discussion of his talents stood and thought that he had no desire to repeat his past life. Looking at his mother standing next to him, Steve also noted to himself that in this life, he would not turn away from her and would not allow her to die, vowing to himself to devote his life to her. The director had already managed to turn his attention to Steve, handing him his business card and asking his name. Accepting the business card, the young man hesitantly said his name, continuing to repeat to himself that he would not be an actor in this life.